Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. Let me tell you something about hospital buildings that most people don't think about. They change constantly, not in the way that office buildings change, with renovations that get planned and permitted and completed in a reasonable sequence. Hospitals change the way living things change, reactively and in pieces. A wall going up here because a department expanded, a corridor rerouted there because of a code update, a room repurposed so many times over decades that the original blueprints become a kind of historical fiction. After enough years, the physical building and the documented building start to drift apart in small ways that nobody fully tracks. I thought about that a lot after what happened in October. I'd been doing IT infrastructure work for Callaway Regional for about 4 years, which meant I was the person who got called when the network hiccuped, when a workstation stopped talking to the system, and when the security camera feeds did anything unexpected. I was not technically a security specialist, but the hospital ran lean on overnight staff, and I was available and capable, and the rate was good. So I was on the on-call rotation for after-hours tech issues, alongside the 2 people who were actually credentialed for it. The call came on a Tuesday night, transferred to me from the overnight security desk. The officer on duty, a steady and unexcitable man named Thresh, told me that camera 31 on the 3rd floor had started producing what he described as a feed that didn't look right. I asked him to be more specific. He thought about it for a moment. "It's showing a hallway," he said, "but not one of ours." I got there in about 40 minutes, and Thresh met me at the security desk and pulled up the feed on the monitoring array without much preamble. He was the kind of man who believed in letting evidence speak before commentary, which I'd always appreciated about him. Camera 31 was mounted in the northeast corner of the 3rd floor, angled to cover the corridor junction near the old wing. On the monitor, it was showing a hallway. Linoleum floor, drop ceiling, fluorescent lighting, nothing that would look out of place in any institutional building of a certain age. Clean and empty and lit in the flat, particular way of a hallway that doesn't see much traffic. Except I knew the 3rd floor layout well enough to know that the northeast corner junction was a T intersection that ended in a supply room on the right and the nursing station on the left. There was no straight corridor extending from that camera's angle of view. The camera should have been showing the junction and the wall at the end of it and nothing else. Instead, it was showing a hallway that extended roughly 50 feet before making a left turn and disappearing. "When did this start?" I asked. "Noticed it about an hour ago," Thresh said. "But look at the timestamp." He pulled up the recording history for camera 31. The feed going back 2 weeks showed the normal junction view, the supply room door, the corner of the nursing station, everything as expected. Then he jumped to the recording from 9 nights ago, just after 2 in the morning, and the junction view was gone, and the hallway was there, fully formed, like a channel that had been changed. 9 nights of a hallway that didn't exist, and nobody had flagged it until tonight. I looked at the monitoring station and understood why. There were 62 cameras in the system. 31 was in the lower right quadrant of the array and shared its display space with 5 others. Unless you were specifically watching it, the switch would be easy to miss, especially at low traffic hours when nothing was moving in any of the feeds. I went up to the 3rd floor to look at the physical space myself. The northeast corner junction was exactly as it had always been. The supply room door on the right, the nursing station around the left, and straight ahead, a solid wall with a fire safety placard on it and a hand sanitizer dispenser mounted at hip height. No door, no corridor, just wall. I stood there for a while and looked at it and thought about angles of view and lens distortion and every technical explanation I could reach for, and none of them came close to accounting for what the camera was showing. The camera was pointed at this wall and recording a hallway. Those were not reconcilable facts. I went back downstairs and called Rowan. Denny Rowan managed facilities for Callaway Regional and had been doing so for going on 18 years, which meant he knew the physical history of the building better than anyone alive. He was a compact, methodical man who kept his own set of renovation records going back to when he started, because he'd learned early that the official records had gaps. He picked up on the 3rd ring sounding awake enough that I suspected I wasn't the first call he'd fielded tonight, though he didn't say so. I described what the camera was showing. There was a pause on his end that ran longer than a simple processing pause. Northeast corner, 3rd floor, he said. Camera 31. You know something about that space? Come to the facilities office, he said. I want to show you something in person. He was already there when I arrived, standing at his drafting table with a set of blueprint rolls pulled from a flat file cabinet against the wall. The ones on top were the current floor plans, which I recognized. The ones underneath were older, the paper yellowed at the edges, the fold lines soft with age. He spread the older set and pointed at the 3rd floor layout. There was a hallway in the northeast section. It ran about 50 feet from the junction and turned left, exactly as the camera was showing, and terminated at what the blueprint labeled as a record storage room. The hallway had been part of the original wing layout, built in the late 1970s, when that section of the hospital was constructed. Renovation in 97, Rowan said, tracing the area with his finger. They walled it off when they reconfigured the nursing station flow, decided the records room wasn't worth the corridor space it required, moved record storage to the basement, put up a wall at the junction, and that was that. He looked at me. Structurally, the hallway is still there. The wall and the drop ceiling were added, but the original corridor runs behind them. Has for almost 30 years. I looked at the blueprint and then thought about the camera feed. So the camera is somehow showing what's behind the wall. That's not how cameras work, Rowan said, which was accurate and not helpful. I went back to the security desk with him and we pulled up the footage from camera 31, going back as far as the recording archive held. The system kept 30 days of footage before overwriting. We went back to the oldest available recording and found the hallway already there. It hadn't appeared in the archive window we had access to. It had simply always been there, within the 30 days we could see, which meant it could have been there for much longer than 9 days, much longer than 30. Has anyone else seen this? Rowan asked Thresh. Not that I know of, Thresh said, then more carefully. Though I'll tell you something. That camera gets checked less than most. It's in a quiet corner, and nothing ever happens over there. He paused. Hasn't for years. I spent about an hour going through the footage methodically, starting from the oldest available and moving forward. And about 20 minutes in, I found the figure. It appeared in the recording from 11 days back, moving from the left turn at the far end of the hallway toward the camera, walking upright, normal pace, average build, wearing something that read in the footage as plain and dark. It moved like a person moves, with all the correct mechanics of walking, the weight shift and the arm movement, and the slight variation in stride. But the proportions were slightly off in a way that was hard to isolate. The head was positioned on the neck at an angle that was almost but not quite right. The arms swung in the correct rhythm, but seemed to reach a fraction too far at the end of each swing. These were things you dismiss as camera distortion if you weren't looking carefully. I was looking carefully. It walked toward the camera and then stopped about 15 feet from it and faced the wall on the left side of the hallway and stood there. I watched it stand there for 4 minutes and 30 seconds without moving, facing the wall, before it turned and walked back the way it had come and rounded the corner and was gone. I looked at Rowan. He was watching the screen with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and the expression of a man who has decided not to say what he is thinking. I kept going through the footage. The figure appeared 7 more times across the 11 days, always in the same hallway, always moving with that almost right quality that I found harder to look at the longer I spent on it. Twice it was carrying something. The object was small, held in both hands in front of it, and between frames, not smoothly, not in any way that could be explained by motion blur or compression. It changed. Different shape in each frame it was visible, not dramatically different, just enough that by the time the figure moved out of frame, you weren't certain what you'd seen to begin with. On the third most recent appearance, it stopped beneath the camera and looked up. I don't know how to describe the face in a way that conveys the specific quality of what was wrong with it. It was a face. It had the correct components, but looking at it felt like looking at a translation of a face done by something that had studied faces extensively without ever having one. All the elements present, none of the life behind them. It looked up at the camera for about 6 seconds and then walked back down the hallway. After that, the footage showed it on other cameras. Camera 40 on the second floor picked it up twice, moving through the radiology waiting area after hours. Same unhurried pace, once stopping beside a row of chairs and standing there for several minutes before continuing. Camera 17 in the main corridor near the elevators showed it once, briefly, walking in a direction that would have taken it into the wall at the end of the corridor if it had kept going. And then the frame was empty and there was no footage of it stopping or turning. It was simply in the corridor, and then it wasn't. I was working through the second floor footage when Thresh's radio crackled. A night nurse on the third floor, calm but specific in her report. A patient in room 314 had called the nursing station to say that something had been standing in the corner of the room. The patient, an older man who'd been admitted 2 days prior, was alert and oriented and had said it clearly and without distress. He said it had stood in the corner near the window for what felt like several minutes and then walked into the wall and was gone. Rowan and I went up to 314. The patient was awake and sitting up in the bed, not frightened in the way I'd expected, more annoyed than anything else. The way someone is annoyed by an interruption they didn't ask for. He described what he'd seen calmly and with detail. He said it was tall and dark, and that it had been facing the corner rather than the room, like it was looking at something in the wall. He said it hadn't acknowledged him at any point. He said when it walked into the wall, it didn't pass through it like a ghost in a movie. He said it was more like the wall opened for it in a way he couldn't fully describe, and then was solid again. I looked at the corner by the window and then at the building plans on my phone and understood that the corner of room 314 shared a wall with what used to be the sealed corridor. The room was adjacent to the original hallway space. I thanked the patient and we went back to the corridor and stood there, not talking for a moment. "It's using the hallway to move between floors," Rowan said quietly. "Wherever it's going, whatever it's doing, the hallway is how it gets there." "Has anyone been hurt?" I asked. He shook his head, then less certainly. "Not that we know of." I went back to the server room on the ground floor to run a full diagnostic on the camera system, partly because it needed doing and partly because I needed somewhere quiet to think through what I was going to put in a report. The server room was a narrow space behind the IT office, cool and loud with the white noise of the equipment racks, and I'd spent enough time in it over 4 years that it felt like one of the more familiar rooms in the building. I ran the diagnostic and it came back clean, which was not a surprise and not a comfort, and I sat in the chair at the workstation and looked at the results and thought about the footage and the blueprint and the patient in 314 and tried to find an arrangement of those things that produced a sensible answer. Around 4 in the morning, I checked camera 31 again. The hallway was gone. The feed was showing the junction as it should have always been, the supply room door and the corner of the nursing station and the wall straight ahead with the fire safety placard and the hand sanitizer. Normal, unambiguous. I sat with that for a moment, deciding how to feel about it. Then I became aware of the door. It was in the server room wall, set into the space between 2 equipment racks in the corner behind the door I'd come through. A plain door, no particular age to it, no handle on my side, just the flat face of it flush with the wall. I stood up slowly and looked at it and looked at the wall it was in and thought about what was on the other side of that wall. According to every floor plan I had ever seen, the other side of that wall was an exterior concrete barrier. The server room was at the end of the building. There was no space behind that wall for any kind of room or corridor. From behind the door came the sound of footsteps, unhurried, evenly paced, moving away from me down a corridor that the building did not have, the sound of them traveling some distance and then fading to the particular quality of quiet that a long, empty hallway produces when something has just left it and the air is still settling back into place. I stood in the server room and listened until the quiet was complete. I filed my incident report at 6:15 that morning. It documented a camera feed anomaly attributed to a firmware error on the camera 31 unit, which had since self-corrected and recommended a full camera system audit. I described nothing else. I have thought since then about whether that was the right decision, and I haven't arrived anywhere useful on it. hospital is still running. The third floor nursing station is still operating its normal rotation. The patient in 314 was discharged 2 days later, and as far as I know, went home fine. The server room door was gone when I came in the following morning. The wall was solid in that corner, as it had always been, and I checked twice to be sure. I still work there. I still go into the server room. But I do something now that I didn't do before, which is that every time I sit down at the workstation, I check the corner behind me before I get started. Not because I expect to see anything. It's become a habit, the way habits do when your body decides to be careful about something, regardless of whether your mind has caught up. 2 weeks ago, I was in the server room late finishing a network issue, and I did my check and the wall was clear, and I turned back to the workstation and got to work. About an hour later, I checked again. I don't know why I checked again. The job was done and I was getting ready to leave, and there was no reason to look. The door was back, and from somewhere behind it, faint and even and patient, something was walking.